Namaste, welcome to the Advaita channel. Happy to be here, happy to be reading once again from The Transparency of Things by Rupert Spira, and their contemplations that point us directly to the experience of who we are, of what we are, help us to see beyond the assumptions, the mental assumptions that seemingly constrain us to this body and mind. So it's just a time to listen, to read, and as reading takes place, hopefully clearer understanding, clearer feeling of this reality will become apparent. So what I do is I read up to the natural breaks in the book, and then there's some silence. I've got to remember actually to speak up because I've got a naturally quiet voice. So let me just check. I think there's two viewers now, so you can comment if you're able to, and let me know if you can hear, if the sound is good, if you're able to, and just let me know. And if I'm speaking too quietly, you can write a comment. You have to be signed in to make comment, but please do so if my voice is too quiet, and I'll adjust. Thank you for joining me. It's lovely to have you here. It's a real joy, genuinely a real joy to read from this. Sadhguru Mujiji Jai. Sadhguru Anantaji Jai. Knowingness is the substance of all things. The apparent continuity of any object is in fact the continuity of consciousness. We could say that in the stream of experience, it is knowingness or experiencing that persists, that is continuous, and that an appearance is simply a modulation of this knowingness. An appearance has no substance or continuity of its own. Knowingness is present before, during, and after every experience. During any appearance itself, knowingness takes the shape of that appearance. During the absence of any appearance, it simply remains as it always is, As an appearance, every object is limited. For instance, the body, mind, is limited as an appearance. But in reality, the substance of this appearance is consciousness itself, and as such has no limitations. From the point of view of ignorance, consciousness seems to take on the qualities of the body-mind. That is, it seems to become personal and limited. From the point of view of understanding, our true body and our true mind is impersonal, unlimited consciousness itself. Before and after every appearance, knowingness simply knows itself as itself. This self-knowing is colourless, transparent, self-luminous and self-evident. Whatever remains after the disappearance of an object has no objective qualities. However, experiencingness remains. That is what consciousness is. It is pure experiencing. When there are no objects present, this experiencingness remains as it always is, experiencing itself. Experiencingness or knowingness are synonyms for consciousness. The desire to experience experiencingness or to know knowingness as an object is the very thing that prevents us from abiding knowingly as experiencingness or knowingness. By seeking for itself elsewhere in this way, consciousness overlooks itself. It is this agitation, the desire to experience consciousness as an object, which seems to veil the experience of consciousness knowing itself. In spite of this, consciousness is in fact always knowing itself. It cannot not know itself, because knowing is its nature. However, it sometimes knows itself without knowing that it knows, without recognizing itself. It is not aware that it is aware of itself. The desire to experience consciousness as an object comes from the belief that consciousness is not already present. This belief is fueled and substantiated by a deep sense of lack at the level of the body, the feeling, I want something, I need something. Every time this sense of lack is relieved by the acquisition of a desired object, consciousness briefly glimpses itself, and this experience is known as happiness. In fact, it is not a brief moment, it is a timeless moment. However, it is not the acquired object that causes the happiness. It is the dissolution of the sense of lack, which is apparently brought about by the acquisition of the object, which allows the pre-existing happiness to be revealed. So the relaxation of this desire to experience consciousness, an object, which actually prevents us from abiding as consciousness knowingly, requires more than simply the understanding that consciousness is not an object. It requires a deep sensitivity to the sense of lack, to the feeling that we need something that is not present in order to make us happy, to the feelings and impulses at the level of the body and how we escape them through thinking. Once this is understood, we no longer need the acquisition of an object to dissolve the sense of lack. We go directly to the sense of lack itself and face it as it is. We do not act on the impulse and escape it through thinking, desiring, and acting. We have the courage to face it. We have the courage not to try and relieve it, not to do anything about it. We simply allow the feeling of lack to be fully present. We do not add anything to it. That is easy because we, consciousness, are already the allowing or welcoming of all things. We simply let consciousness take care of everything. The clear seeing of these feelings reveals that they are in fact no more than neutral bodily sensations with no inherent power to generate thinking, desiring, or fearing, let alone a sense of lack or separation. This, in our understanding, is accomplished effortlessly through clear seeing. We do not do anything to the feelings. In fact, we stop doing something to them. We stop investing them with the power to veil reality. We stop investing them with the power to generate unhappiness and its attendant seeking. As soon as we stop superimposing feelings onto bodily sensations, they cease to be an abode of ignorance and confusion and are revealed instead as a beautiful display of creative energies dancing in the emptiness of presence, revealing its fullness moment by moment. Of course, desires continue to arise, but their purpose is no longer the avoidance of feeling nor the attainment of happiness. Their purpose is to express happiness. Their purpose, in fact their nature, is to manifest, share, and celebrate happiness. Our true body. Experience always takes place now, in the present. So if we want to explore the nature of reality, all we have is this current experience. In this current experience, we have all the information that is needed to understand the nature of ourselves and of reality, because both we, whatever we are, and reality, whatever it is, are present. All that is necessary is to stick very closely to our actual experience and not rely on concepts or ideas from the past about the way we think things are. We have to come very cleanly to this exploration of experience and only permit that which we know for ourselves to be true. In this moment, there is something that is being experienced. We may not know what that something is. For instance, it may be a dream or a hallucination, but we know that there is something. There is something that is known. That is the body, mind, and world. And there is something, that which we refer to as I, that is experiencing or knowing the known. These two, these apparent two, the experienced and the experiencer, the known and the knower, the perceived and the perceiver, are in fact always one seamless totality. They are not two things in our actual experience. However, we tend to focus mainly, if not exclusively, on the objective aspect of this seamless totality. In most cases, our attention is primarily occupied with thoughts and images, feelings and sensations, and sense perceptions. That is, with the mind, the body, and the world. By contrast, in these contemplations, we focus on the subjective aspect of experience rather than the objective aspect. We give our attention to the perceiver rather than the perceived. In spite of the fact that experience is always one seamless totality, we artificially separate the perceiver from the perceived, the experiencer from the experienced, the subjective aspect of experience from the objective aspect. The purpose of doing this is to draw attention to the subjective aspect, to the knower, the perceiver, the experiencer, to the presence of consciousness, which witnesses whatever it is that is being experienced from moment to moment. Normally, we are so absorbed in the objective aspect of experience that we overlook the presence of consciousness within and behind every experience. Consciousness, or that to which we refer as I, is that which perceives or experiences. It is that which witnesses the mind, the body, and the world. It is that which is seeing and understanding these words right now. In this moment, something is being experienced, and whatever that something is, whether it is the mind, the body, or the world, it is being perceived or experienced by consciousness, by that which we call I or me. This consciousness is an undeniable fact of our experience. Even the denial of consciousness requires consciousness. However, we have forgotten that the real nature of this I, of ourself, is consciousness. the presence that is witnessing and experiencing whatever it is that is being experienced in this moment. This presence of consciousness stands alone, independent of any of the objects of the mind, body, and world that appear to it, in the same way that a mirror stands alone, independent of whatever is reflected within it. However, we have confused and identified this witnessing consciousness with the body and the mind, and as a result we have come to think and feel that I is something, that it is a body-mind. The body, mind, and world are all equally objects of consciousness. However, having mistakenly identified consciousness with the body-mind, we have transferred the status of subject, which properly belongs to consciousness alone, onto the body-mind. In this way, we have come to think and feel that it is I, as the body-mind, which experiences the world. However, the body-mind does not witness or experience anything. It is itself witnessed, experienced. We experience the mind, thoughts and images, and the body, sensations, in just the same way that we experience the world, sense perceptions. Each of these experiences is equally an object of consciousness. The mind and the body are no less objects of consciousness than is the world. In this way, we return the mind and the body in our understanding to their proper place as objects of consciousness, along with the world. And by giving the mind and the body back to the objective realm, we are, by the same token, returning the I in our understanding to consciousness. In our contemplation, we give attention to this witnessing consciousness. All that means is that we abide as this witnessing consciousness knowingly. That is, this consciousness abides in itself as itself knowingly. We allow the mind, the body, and the world to appear, to remain and to disappear in this presence of consciousness. That is what they're doing anyway, so we simply cooperate with what is always already the case. In this state we know our self, consciousness, to be nothing that is conceivable or perceivable, and yet we know that we are. So having mistakenly identified I, consciousness, with the body, mind, and come, as a result, to know ourselves as something, we now come to understand ourself as the witness, as nothing objective. Consciousness, I, the subject, is already at rest. It is already peaceful. In fact, it is peace itself. Peace is inherent in consciousness. The agitation of the mind, the body, and the world appear in consciousness, but consciousness is not agitated by them. It is our experience that consciousness, that which we know ourself to be, is always present, always remains as it is, unchanging and unmoving, and always impartially welcomes into itself the totality of our objective experience, irrespective of the nature of that experience. Taking our stand as this ever-present consciousness, we can look again at our experience and see that we never actually experienced the mind, the body, or the world in the way that we usually conceive them. The mind consists of this current thought or image, whatever it is we are thinking or imagining in this moment. There is no container called the mind in which all our memories, hopes, fears, and desires, etc., are stored. Whenever a memory, hope, fear, or desire, etc., appears, it appears as a current thought. The idea that there is a mind which contains memories, hopes, fears, and desires is itself simply a thought that appears from time to time like any other thought in consciousness. There is no mind as such. The existence of a mind is simply an idea, a concept. It is a useful concept, but it is not a fact of experience. Likewise, we do not experience the body in the way we normally conceive it. In fact, there is no body as such. There is a series of sensations and perceptions appearing in consciousness. And from time to time, there is a thought or an image of a body, which is considered to be the sum total of all these sensations and perceptions. However, this thought or image appears in consciousness in exactly the same way as the sensations and perceptions to which it apparently refers. And this apparent body is made of the same substance as a thought. It is made of mind, taking mind in the broadest sense of the term, to include sensing and perceiving, as well as thinking. If we stick closely to the actual experience of our bodily sensations, we see that they are shapeless and contourless. We may experience a visual perception of the skin, and from several different perceptions conceive a well-defined border which contains all other bodily sensations. However, this conception does not describe the reality of our experience. The visual perception of the surface of the body is one perception. A bodily sensation is another perception. When one of these perceptions is present, the other is not. If they are both present, they are one perception, one experience. One perception cannot appear within another. All perceptions appear within consciousness. We do not experience the sensation inside the body. What we call the body is in fact the experience of a sensation. We do not experience a sensation within a well-defined contour of skin. We experience a sensation within consciousness, and we experience a visual perception within consciousness. We can explore this further by imagining what it would be like to draw our actual experience of the body at any given moment on a piece of paper. Would it look anything like the body we normally conceive? Would it not be a collection of minute, amorphous, abstract marks floating on the page without a shape or a border? Is not the actual experience of the body a collection of minute, amorphous, tingling sensations free-floating in the space of consciousness? And if we look at these sensations, are they not permeated and saturated with the presence of consciousness in which they appear? The continuity and coherence that we normally ascribe to the body, in fact, belong to consciousness. In fact, our true body is consciousness. It is consciousness that houses all the sensations that we normally refer to as the body. Our true body is open, transparent, weightless, and limitless. It is inherently empty and yet contains all things within itself. That is why such an empty body is also inherently loving. It is the welcoming embrace of all things. I am everything. In order to draw attention to the presence and primacy of this witnessing consciousness, we can divide the seamless totality of our experience into a perceiving subject, consciousness, and a perceived object, the body, mind, and world. As we have seen, this enables us to explore the experience of consciousness and to see if there is any validity to the claim that it is limited to an individual personal body-mind. It also enables us to explore the nature of the object. What is an object really made of? What is the relationship between the mind, body, and world that appear within consciousness and consciousness itself? For instance, take a sound that is present now. Do we experience a boundary between that sound and the consciousness that perceives it? Is there a border between them? So take a sound that is present now. Do we experience a boundary between that sound and the consciousness that perceives it? Is there a border between them? The perception of a sound, the sensation that we call my hand, and the current thought all appear free-floating in the same space of consciousness. Is that not our actual experience? Is it true that our thoughts are on the inside of this consciousness and that sounds are on the outside? What is our actual experience of the boundary between what is inside myself and what is outside myself? There is no experience of such a boundary. If we think that we do experience such a boundary, is not that boundary itself a perception, an object that is free-floating in consciousness, along with whatever else is being experienced in the moment? Does this apparent border really separate the thought inside myself from the sound outside? Is it true that the sensation that we call our hand, for instance, is closer to us, that is, closer to this witnessing consciousness than the sound we are hearing in the distance? In the distance is a concept. The sound appears here, in me, in consciousness, in exactly the same place as the sensation we call our hand. Do they not both appear at an equal distance from consciousness, which is no distance at all? Are they not both equally one with consciousness, with I, with that which experiences them? And I, consciousness, am here. I am always here. This here is not a place. It is absolute intimacy, absolute immediacy, absolute identity. Why do we think that the sensation we call hand is closer to us than the sound in the distance? Is that our actual experience? If consciousness is likened to the space in this room, and the mind, the body and the world are likened to the objects that appear within it, is it true to say that the chair, for instance, that we are sitting on is closer to the space in this room than the table? Is the floor closer to the space than the ceiling? That is absurd. And yet when we say that our hand is closer to us, to consciousness, than the sound in the distance, or that a thought is closer to us than our hand, it is equally absurd. That is not our experience. Our experience is that each appears at the same zero distance from consciousness. But if we now look very closely at the substance of the object that is appearing within consciousness, will be differentiated from it in any way. There is no part of the experience of an object that is not utterly saturated and permeated by consciousness itself. Consciousness is not simply the witness, but also the substance of every object that appears within it. Every object is made out of consciousness. It is an expression of consciousness. To begin with, we understand objects as appearing to consciousness. Then we understand that they appear in consciousness. Then we understand that they appear as consciousness. In this way, consciousness reabsorbs the body, the mind, and the world into itself. Even that formulation is not quite right, because it suggests that an object has somehow come from outside and has appeared within consciousness, that consciousness takes the object into itself. However, consciousness is there first, before the appearance of any object. The very first experience we ever had as a newborn infant was experienced by this very consciousness that is present now, seeing these words. Of course, it does not make sense to say before, because when there are no objects, there is no time. But we have to accept this limitation of language. It is not that consciousness takes the object into itself. It is that consciousness takes the shape of the apparent object through the faculties of sensing and perceiving, and yet at the same time always remains itself. Initially, consciousness identifies itself with the object, and in doing so it seems to forget itself. Later on, it takes the shape of the object without forgetting itself. When consciousness seems to forget itself, the object is experienced as an object with its own apparent separate existence. When consciousness takes the shape of the object without forgetting itself, the object is experienced as an expression of presence itself. In fact, consciousness takes the shape of every experience we have. In this condition, we, consciousness, know ourselves to be everything. The transparent, luminous, empty, self-knowing nothingness, no thingness of consciousness takes the shape of the totality of our experience. It knows itself as everything. Consciousness is always only itself, and yet in exclusively identifying itself with an object, the body-mind, it seems to become something. It seems to become an object. In disidentifying itself from the object, it realizes itself as the subject. It realizes itself as nothing, as empty. That is, it realizes that it is not an object, not a thing. As it reconsiders the object from the position of the subject, it realizes that the subject, that is itself, goes into the make of the object. It realizes itself as everything. This condition could be called love. It is the natural state in which the nothingness of the witness is liberated from any objectivity or limitation and realizes itself to be the very substance of everything. Consciousness knows itself as everything. It realizes that everything is included within itself and is an expression of itself. It goes beyond subject and object. Subject and object collapse into that which is behind, beyond, and within both. We could call this being. Consciousness becomes something, then nothing, then everything, and yet always remains itself. Consciousness is known as the perceived, then the perceiver, then the perceiving, and yet throughout this process, consciousness remains always only itself. Consciousness never goes anywhere. Consciousness never becomes anything. There is only consciousness. There is only being, which simultaneously creates, witnesses, expresses, and experiences itself in every experience we have. Take some silence just to feel that. Just to feel ourselves as this consciousness. That there's no need to even look for. It's taking the shape of all experience. You don't have to do anything to be this. Okay. Thank you for joining me. It's been lovely just to read that, to feel the truth, the truth that it points to, that the way that we separate this mind, body and world up is not actually the case. When you really take a good look. So this time next week I'll be reading again. Thanks for joining me, and you can find, I think, more on the Advaita channel by the Sangha of Being, readings from different texts that point to this truth. And I'm very happy to be sharing in this. So thank you, and hopefully see you next time. Om Shanti.